Welcome to High Performance Hockey Podcast. Today we're joined by athletic performance specialist and associate athletic trainer of the Jacksonville Jaguars, Dr. Pete Draovitch. Pete was hired as a Jaguars athletic performance specialist and associate athletic trainer and physical therapist in April 2019. In his current role, Pete assists the medical staff as well as the strength and conditioning staff and works closely with injured players in their rehabilitation programs. This is a really interesting conversation. Learned a ton from Pete. He's got such a diverse background in professional golf, professional ice hockey, and professional football. We talk about this idea of being a Swiss Army knife. We talk about an experience of working with high performance golf, how that parlayed into his experience in the National Hockey League, what he's currently doing with the Jacksonville Jaguars. We also speak about an article that he wrote in the Journal of Arthroscopy, Sports Medicine, and Rehab in 2022, and this idea behind the return to sports clearance continuum. It's an outstanding episode. Welcome to the podcast. Pete, thanks so much for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Anthony.
I asked a couple of people at the conclusion of their interviews, who would be a great person to get on this podcast? And Reg Grant has been on a couple times by himself and then with Mal McHugh as well. And he was the first person on the list. He said, Anth, you got to get Pete on. So walk us through that relationship. I'm going to ask you a little bit about your time with the Rangers, but how do you know Reg?
I met Reg when I was with the Rangers. I was working as a physical therapist at Hospital for Special Surgery in New York City. I worked closely with a couple of the team physicians on clinical care, but I'd been in sports my whole life. So if I wasn't seeing people in the clinical side for the doctors, I was doing some freelance stuff, seeing some athletes. And what ended up happening is one of the Rangers trainers had something happen that he needed a surgery on. Jim Ramsey, at the suggestion of one of the doctors, said, hey, do you got anybody that could fill in for a week or two? So what ended up happening is they were going on a trip. They were going to, I think, Ottawa and Boston. I'm an athletic trainer as well as a therapist. So what ended up happening is I went in. It was an environment that I was familiar with. After the trip, Rammer says to me, he says, hey, can you go with us next week? And I said, well, I got people coming in. I can't do that. He said, well, if you can, keep the time open when the playoffs start. I'd like to have you come down and help out. So after that, at the end of that season, I forget if that was 16, 15, something like that, they figured out a way to get me to be more of a staff member. So I got placed in a position of assistant strength coach. And then that made my relationship with Reg stronger. So I basically worked out of the weight room. I did stuff in the training room as well, but it's when the team was on the road, I took care of the treatment plans for the players then. And then in the weight room, I spent more of my time there in a reconditioning capacity and then worked with Reg and Adam Virgil.
Another great human being.
Great. We had a nice little system there. And they exposed me to a lot of the sports science stuff that I still see and interpret today.
Outstanding. Well, I do want to rewind back to that time, but I want to start with your current duties and responsibilities for the Jacksonville Jaguars, athletic performance specialist / associate athletic trainer. Walk us through what your duties and responsibilities include right now in the National Football League.
Basically, I'm based out of the training room now. My position here has changed all the time. When I first came in, I had my office in the weight room. The next year, COVID hit, so it was all hands on deck. And I was able to go between the rooms. So again, sometimes I was doing training room stuff, but a lot more time because we had limited time that we could see players. You could only spend 12 minutes with a player before you got zapped out based on if you were wearing your monitor. So if somebody got knocked out because you were with them too long, it may have meant then you had 4 other people that were going to get knocked out too. So we had to manage that. And then the next year, what ended up happening is they started a different system here where Coach Meyer, when he came in, he had what he called liaisons. And liaisons, he assigned one person to each of the groups of a position group from a strength room standpoint and from a training room standpoint. So that year I worked specifically with quarterbacks. I was placed in the quarterback group and then also did stuff for some of the other players as well, but mainly that was my job. And then the last 2 years I've been based out of, last year was sports science and performance, with some rehab. And now this year's been more rehab and drift to the other room the other way. It's been a mix of everything, but this is my first year where I'll do a lot more treatments, a lot more evals. And then on top of that, I'll spend some time in the training room, spend time with sports science, looking at interpreting data, and then paralleling that to what we're seeing clinically.
That's outstanding, which kind of parallels right into my next question. I mean, I looked at your resume and your bio before our interview. You are a human Swiss Army knife, which is outstanding. You have a very deep background. I would call, and I say this, almost a serial specialist in many ways, right? You've had the opportunity to work in professional golf. You were personally caring for Greg Norman at the time, the Shark. Correct me if I'm
Correct.
wrong, right?
Yes.
Your background in hockey, your background in football. Let me ask you this question: commonalities and differences. Is there differences in a treatment philosophy, or is it a universal treatment philosophy? We're all human beings.
For me, the experience has been, I'd take it and make it more microeconomic and say it's been about the person. The position itself is going to determine some of the things that you're always going to look at. Like in baseball, we know you're going to have arm care for pitchers, you're going to have arm care for quarterbacks. But the philosophy and the injuries that you see are usually completely different. When I look at hockey, you had collision type injuries, you had overuse type injuries, such as you had low back, you had acute stuff such as rib strains, you had MCLs in the knee, you had foot and ankle stuff sometimes. You had a lot more skin lesions, a lot more contusions. In golf, that was a sport where there was a lot more overuse stuff. Again, I was still seeing backs. I was still seeing left shoulders because of the arm going across the body. I saw a lot of hips. And now you come to football and you see a gamut of everything. You see your Liz Frank fractures. You see your high ankle sprains. You see your ACLs, MCLs, multiple ligaments. You see your femoral acetabular impingements. You see your core muscle injuries, which is another thing that was familiar with hockey. So the types of injuries that you see can be similar. It's just whether they're acute, they're chronic, they're collision, they're contact, they're non-contact. So for me, it's been really great because one sport that taught me an awful lot was the golf, because the feet stayed on the ground. There was no escape routes. So
I like that. No escape routes.
there's none. When you look at other sports, since you can move so freely, you can compensate however you want. And if you're good enough, you get away with it, but eventually you'll break down somewhere in that chain.
Sure.
In golf, your feet stay on the ground. So that you can slide your feet a little bit, you might shift your weight a little bit, but if you're not doing it somewhat correctly, the outcome is going to be it's not going to be very good. So that's and every sport taught me something a little different. The mentality of a hockey player that has to play 82 games a year, the travel, the recovery. The recovery is amazing. Football is very structured. I know what I'm doing every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, every part of 18 to 20 weeks a year once the season starts before playoffs. And then golf, instead of being gone for 2 days, 3 days, maybe 10 days max, what you'll be gone is you'll be gone as many as 3-4 weeks if you're working specifically with somebody, especially if you go overseas. So if you go overseas, then you're going to you might be in Europe for 1 week for a tournament, then you might be in Japan the next week for a tournament, back home, hit the West Coast, and then you're home for the next week. So I've been exposed to an awful lot of different amazing athletes. And then I've always tried to make sure that I stayed around great clinicians and great doctors, because they help drive the thought process that you have as a clinician and as a performance person.
One of my mentors, Dan Paff, always talked to me about first principles. He said, Anthony, in this day and age with so much technology and so much information, he would call these, this is my interpretation of Coach Paff's message. Here are the first principles: know your programming, know basic physics, know psychology, i.e., the perception of the program may be more important than the program itself, right? Biomechanics. And the last one is psychology, which again, these are basics, but have a baseline knowing of all of these, what helps you to enrich your decisions in terms and measures of all of the information being handed out. Would that be something that you concur with as well, with everything that's flowing around this day? Do you have first principles that you go by?
I'm pretty much eclectic. So, I mean, it's, I make it very simple for myself. And I have a mobility bias for certain people. I have a stability bias for certain people, and I have a motor learning bias for others. And again, it means that in the beginning, when you come out, you're shooting with a shotgun. By the end, you want to be shooting with a rifle a little bit more often, that you could be a little bit more predictive about what you've done. I mean, what Dan's done down there at Altus is absolutely amazing. And that's one thing I'd recommend. If anybody wants to get a great understanding of strength and conditioning, take that online program that he has. I took it. It just puts so many things in perspective for what you talk about. So if I was going to say that's how I've approached it, and that's whether it's from a performance standpoint, I mean, look at something as simple as a prowler. I mean, if we want to get stiffness, and because that's the objective of the program that day, we might do slow, heavy prowler pushes, or we might just do iso prowler pushes into the wall and hold those for 10, 20 seconds. If we want to increase a little bit, we might go from the heavy prowler pushes to a lighter weight, moving it a little bit faster, and then maybe bounding prowlers. So again, everything is a build on top of the other. But when the evaluation to me is the most important thing, or the screen, because it shows me where the issue truly is. For probably the past 20, 25 years now, when I look at any type of situation, is basically structure influences function. It doesn't tell you everything. You could get around it. Structure influences function. Function regulates performance. Performance speed masks imbalance. Imbalance is indicative of compensation, and compensation is predictive of either poor performance or physical breakdown at the point of the compensation or somewhere along the chain. And it's gone that way for a long, long time for me now. So that's why I try to break it down and identify what the reason for the problem is in the beginning, because stability is more than it's strength, it's motor learning, it's capacity. So that's what I try to do.
Like an onion, it's layered, right?
Exactly.
I misspoke on these principles. Physics, psychology, programming, physiology, and biomechanics. Nonetheless, you did mention this fact, this idea of as we've grown, we get more of a rifle like approach, which again leads me to a great little transition here. You wrote an article, Journal of Arthroscopy, Sports Medicine, Rehab in 2022. I realize in scientific terms and publication terms, that's obviously a couple of years old, and those opinions may have changed. But it is called the Return to Sport Clearance Continuum. Okay, I want to ask a couple rifle-like questions on that, if I could answer those. But number one, what was the impetus in you writing that? Obviously, you've been doing this for many, many years. So was it to share your thought process, your theory in terms and measures of this continuum?
It wasn't anything earth shattering. It was just a message to reinforce to people that if you want to actually see people get better, make sure you're doing some kind of measurement to show that there's a process taking place. So whether you're looking at mobility, you're looking at stability, you're looking at strength, you're looking at strength endurance, you're looking at even something as simple as RPEs. But again, most people, they do stuff and they just throw it up on the wall. And if the person feels better, they think the program's working. If you see athletes that sometimes they feel better, but if you look at their metrics aren't as good as they feel, and vice versa. So not everybody has access to force plates. Okay. But you do have jump mats, which are less expensive. You have Jump Lab, which is an app now. You've got Wide Balance, if you want to look at that instead of RE motion capture. I mean, it runs the gamut, but that was the impetus to show people that just start collecting little things. Handheld dynamometers. They're not, everybody can put one of those in a clinic and start measuring objectively to see if you're actually helping the person.
So in this article, we talked about 5 phases, and I want to touch on a couple of these if you're okay talking about them a little bit more, Pete.
No problem.
So number one is the repair phase, right?
Right.
This biology of tissue repair, inflammation, repair, remodel. Are there certain modalities over the years that you've used for that specific phase? And I'm going to be very specific when I ask this question. We hear and you read different opinions on ice. Inflammation is naturally occurring in the body. We want inflammation. Ice blunts that, right? Or contract, relax, contract, relax. Inflammation's not our enemy. The repair phase, what are some common misconceptions and what tools do you use, if any, for this phase of just let time recover and take time off pending injury?
Let's just take something. We'll use an example. Let's say we
Okay.
got a grade 2 hammy. A soft tissue is the nemesis in professional sports. So let's say you got a grade 2 hammy. You expect them to be back in 3 to 4 weeks. Okay. I know that the first 21 days is the biggest amount of time for me to remodel tissue. So if they're bleeding and they've got some stuff going on in the beginning, I might take 2 to 3 days, and my modalities are going to be, I may use some ice. I've used a lot more light stuff anymore, whether it be infrared beds. If you look at grade 4 lasers, you look at things such as radio frequency, you've got piezo wave, mechanical. So there's so many different things that are out there now. But again, the first 2 to 3 days in that, I want to try and get rid of as much swelling
Okay.
and create a more natural environment for them to start. I'll always start there. The second thing is we may use ice if the person responds to ice, but there's been a big change, as you know, from using less ice and less cold modalities, even though we now have cryo chambers that people go in and it shows the change of reboot system of that. So again, it's knowing the person and seeing how they respond and being, I once had an agent tell me that was pretty good. I asked him one time, I said, how much do you know to ask for when you're representing your client? So you go in and it's contract, it's a endorsement. How do you know how much to ask for? And he said to me, if you're a good listener and you're a good observer, you'll know when to ask and how much to ask for. And I always took that in mind. And so that's what I try and do when I see people. I look and see, did what I did yesterday make a difference? Did it not make a difference? Have I seen it where I've done it in the past and it's made a bigger difference on this person than that person? From that standpoint, I know I got 21 days to make that tissue be gliding the way that it needs to glide. Before, we used to always think about flexibility, stretching that tissue out. A lot of times when it mats down, it's the gliding between the fascia and the different layers of muscle that's important.
Today's episode has been brought to you by Physical Preparation for Ice Hockey, Biological Principles and Practical Solutions, and the Gain Go Grow Manual. This is a 2-part book series exploring training the intermediate and advanced level players. Book number 1 explores training the intermediate player. Chapters include long-term athletic development, considerations, speed training, power training, strength training, and program design. The Gain Go Grow Manual explores training the high-performance hockey player. Chapters include biomechanics of ice hockey, considerations for high performers, minimizing adaptational risks while upsizing gains, the Gain Go Grow model, and example microcycles. More information can be found at Amazon.com. Can I ask you, this brings me to my phase 2, rehab and recovery. Let's take the same injury, this hamstring, okay? Is this simply getting passive and active range of motion back? And then I want to ask a kind of a piggyback question, this idea of stretching. So if there is muscle damage, let's talk a little bit physiology, and there is muscle, like micro damage to the muscle. I always use this analogy, and Pete, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be wrong. This is how I learned from you. I always would stay away from the stretching, because if I always use this analogy, if I poke little holes in a rubber band and I stretch that, which is micro trauma, I might make that stretching worse. I want to work the muscles, perhaps it's the glutes, in areas without that stretch, maybe more isometrics at the start, and then slowly that eccentric, and then et cetera, layer it. Does that make sense? Am I thinking the right way or not?
It doesn't weigh when you got muscle, though. Remember, you got fascicle length that's got to be, you got to be
Yes.
concerned with. It's not the tissue itself. So we do have to make sure that the fascicle length stays where it is. And if we don't stretch it, so in Askling, out of Europe, he has a protocol where he uses that we use initially. But again,
Okay.
it's actually taking the knee, pulling it towards the chest, and then doing knee pops. And we might do 3 sets of 10 twice a day of those initially. After
Okay.
that first 1 to 2 days, if there's some bleeding, but you do it within the limits of pain. You don't
Sure.
just do it through the pain. So again, there is rationale to do some stretching, but the objective of it is for fascicle length. It's not to change the tissue, because like you said, it's like a scar and it's like a scab in there. So if you're trying to scab up and you keep picking at the scab, what happens? It keeps bleeding.
That's right.
So that's the difference there. That if I'm looking at that, I'm looking at fascicle length. I'm not looking at changing the actual fiber length. There's some people, some of the physiologists will probably say, well, he's incorrect because you're changing the fiber length. But again, if it's done in the limit of pain, we've seen that works. And then again, isometrics for sure,
Yep.
in mid-range, pain-free to start. It might be the day, it might be the second day. Now remember, now you got all the orthobiologics that are out there where you've got all of the PRPs and you've got the stem cells. So what if they get thrown into the mix? So now that's another equation that we got to factor in to make the person be able to get what they need, but do it within the constraints of biology of healing.
Can I ask you another question to piggyback on that? Like I realize when we're dealing with these return to plays, let's just take modalities like PRP or blood flow restriction. Is it your opinion, and from doing this so long, is that you try to use as few interventions as possible so you know what worked and what didn't? Meaning, like, okay, we're not going to do the PRP, this, and that. We're going to try one, see the response to that. That might be the one modality that we need, or is it more of a hey, let's try multiple modalities at the onset? Maybe we're not able to tease out what the actual and one was, if that makes sense.
In the professional setting, that seems to be the case for the most part. Like you look at PRP, that's actually changed a lot of stuff, the way things are done. Because remember, when you use the PRP, for people, I don't know if people understand, or not the PRP, the BFR, flow restriction. When you look at something like that, the purpose of it is you can't gain strength and power without tapping into your type 2 fibers. Well, you'll never move fast enough or be able to do that when you're injured in an acute setting. So the BFR has become really helpful because it allows you to tap into those type 2 fibers without going through the impact of a hard workout, because your body can't do it. So that's been very helpful. If you look at PRP, that's still all over the board the way people look at it. Some people use platelet-rich plasma. Some people use platelet-poor plasma, depending on the tissue that they're going into. Some people want 48 hours of rest and just heat, no ice. Some people say 4 weeks before you do anything. So it's not a science yet. They're getting better with the cocktails and how they're designing them. But we got our own system here, and that's what we do. We give a PRP. We let them wait 48 hours. We'll do some heat over it. We won't use any ice, and then some rest, and then we start isometrics and go. So if we have that, that's what we do. And is it in the tendon? Remember, the type of tissue is important too. Is it in the muscle? Is it in the tendon? Is it in the musculotendinous junction? So these things all contribute to the way you address and program your plan, whether it's rehab or performance.
Outstanding, Pete. That was an awesome response. Reconditioning phase. And this is a quote from the article, okay? The
Mhm.
reconditioning phase is without a question the least understood and most presumptuous part of the recovering process. Can you expand on that comment for me?
I think the person that's probably done the most with that is Bill Knowles. I don't know if you've ever met
Yes. Oh,
Bill.
yeah. I haven't met him, but I know about him. Definitely.
Bill's a sharp guy out of Philadelphia, and he always says that the reconditioning phase is when the focus is shifted from the injury to the athlete. So now you got to not only think about taking care of the injury, but you start thinking about what's the demands of this person's sport that we've got to get them ready for. Is what are your key performance indicators? Is there a physiology? Is there a blood lactate level has to be reached? Is there internal and external stressors that we got to be thinking about? So when I think of reconditioning, I'd always say that he's the first person that I think about. That
Yep.
I don't know if he coined the term or not, but he was probably doing it with skiers sooner than anybody that I've seen,
Sure.
because it wasn't as structured for other people. It wasn't as defined, but that transition phase between the acute when you're in the training room to get to the performance side, there's always been that gap that's existed.
Yes.
So I mean, that's what I was basically hired for anyway in my first year when I came down here. That's really knowing a player, knowing responses to tissue. Freddie Fu, a famous surgeon up in Pittsburgh, he had a great saying. He said that swelling is the speedometer of recovery and progression. And you think about it, if a joint's moving well and the load is being handled well, you're not going to get any swelling. However, if you have mechanical issues, if you've got stuff that exists, there's going to be swelling in those types of injuries. So you got to take a step back and think about it. Is it a veteran that's been playing 12 years that we ain't getting rid of that? And let's not kill him during the week. Let's save him for the weekend. Um,
Sure.
but but again, that reconditioning phase is when you start loading. Okay, when you go into a weight room and you've just been doing pistol squats in the training room, what's your progression when you go into the weight room when you get them squatting? Are you gonna go goblet squats? Are you gonna go front squats because their core is weak? Are you gonna go back squats out of the gate? Do they have a back problem? Are you gonna go with belt squats? So to me, that's the part that people get in trouble. And there was an article by a guy named Arnosky. He's a veterinary guy, but in 2008, he wrote an article that made me rethink a lot of stuff. And it said basically that underloading, my interpretation of it was underloading tissue during the rehab phase is going to be dangerous and lead to overloading tissue during the performance phase. So what we've tried to do here now is make sure that that tissue is loaded the way it needs to be prepared so that when it goes into performance took a bad rap for a while, I think, because they were always blamed like you're doing too much, you're doing too much. And it probably wasn't the case. It was the training room or the rehab people weren't loading the tissue enough in the beginning that didn't prepare it for what was about to happen to it.
I think this stage Dan Paff would call the Wild West, right? He said he refers it to it as the Wild West, that gap that you're referring to. I think it's interesting too, at least when I look at it, in my experience, yours obviously dwarfs mine because of your background, et cetera. But I look at it almost like a race where the baton's being passed. And anytime there's a baton that's being passed from either the doctor, AT, PT, strength coach, reconditioning expert, skill coach or head coach, that's where there can be the quote unquote issues. Do you agree with that?
You're 100% correct. I mean, we have a sports scientist here, Chris Bach. He came from the University of Nebraska where he ran the program up there. The term we use down here is that our decisions are data informed, but they're not data driven, because that's the other level that we now have, that we have objective ways that we could actually see if a person is is doing what they need to do. And that sports science, like I tell him, I'm old school. I'm 63 years old. So I tell him what his data does for me is it confirms my eye test. Because
Yes.
I know when a guy's moving good and when he's not moving good. I
Yep.
know when a guy's running the way they need to run and when they're not running the way they need to run.
Sure.
You listen to Dan, I mean, and Boo Schnecksnyder and
Oh yeah.
guys like that and Jonah, and they've been around it. Like, I mean, if that guy's not punching that ground, and you know the sound of a good run when you don't have to have all those measurements. But again, it definitely confirms a lot of stuff.
I'm going to read another quote here. The use of accelerometers, heart rate and sleep monitors, force plates, and movement capturing devices can identify movement patterns, kinetics for helping to develop a customized plan. However, application of these data can only be successful as far as the expertise and common sense of the care providers. And I made a comment, which was I was going to ask you. Sometimes common sense isn't so common. I want to preface it by saying my coaching now going on 25 years, which again dwarfs your experience. But I don't know how you feel about this. From a strength and conditioning and performance coach, I went from testing almost everything to my battery of testing looking more like my hairline. What correlates strongest to having fast hockey players off the ice? Not a lot. Okay. And then what can I use those metrics for baseline measures should someone get injured? Also, can I load the athlete and get strength tests without putting massive amounts of weight and having a skill? For us, it might be an isometric mid thigh pull as opposed to a heavy back squat. These are all areas where we try to measure and manage over the season. Is testing training and training testing for you guys in the National Football League? Meaning, are you getting your baseline tests as part of the process? Or is it just, when you come in for the preseason and everyone's testing, and then, towards the end of the season, you're getting those? How does it work? And what's important, maybe?
You're accurate. If the more that you could put the testing within the system of their program, so that, okay, you're going to do box jumps this time, but on your second set, I need you 3 jumps on the force plate. Okay, we're going to do Copenhagen's for your first set, and now we're going to do a force frame squeeze on your second set. So we try to do it that way because it doesn't make it seem like it's something extra, and the response has been pretty good. And as you know, it's about looking at the body of work. It's not looking at any one moment in time, because we've all seen that if you do that, you can get fooled quite easily. So, but we apply to that philosophy that you just talked about. Training is testing, and testing is training.
Are there any things in the return to play process? And I don't want you to give away anything that's confidential to the Jaguars. That's not what I mean. But are there certain metrics that you hold in higher regard? Is it more field-based work, sprint type work, fast contraction, more specific to the sport for decisions on your return to play? Let's take the hamstring example, for example. Before we're putting that individual back on the field, is there something that you want to see, the performance teams needs to see before, hey, here's the football, go play?
Getting a baseline for people in the beginning is probably the most important thing, because I want to know how fast they run. I want to know their maximum high speed distance. I want to know what it is in a game. And again, all that data is usually available for us to see what position. Or you a position player plus a special teams player? Are you just a special teams player? So to look at accelerometers such as catapult and things like that, and say, okay, what's their max velocity? We know we got to get to their max velocity in their training process if we're going to be successful. If they've had 20 efforts of high speed distance over 12 miles an hour, and 8 of those were over 16 miles an hour, we know we've got to get to that point. If they've had force plate jumps that show that they've done this and now they're doing this. And then clinical, again, there's clinical things. You got to feel the tissue. You've got to, so it's a team approach, and the way that it works best is if it's seamless. So it's a combination of a clinical interpretation, a performance interpretation, a skill field interpretation that's confirmed by what the data is showing us.
Outstanding. Phase 4 and phase 5. Let's start with phase 4, performance phase. Is this when the athlete finally steps back on the ice or on the field? Am I interpreting that correctly?
Okay, there's a return to practice, a return to
Yes.
play, a return to performance. So return to performance to me is when they're in the weight room and getting ready for return to practice. Return to practice then goes to return to play, and then return to play. Now you're going to competition. So competition, you're ready, you've shown. So in return to play, it might be that they just go through an individual session as
Yes.
part of the practice. Then play might be that they're doing some team activities as well at full speed. And then finally, after that, they're cleared to go back to competition.
And who delivers that message? I know you said you meet as a performance staff. Let's take the hypothetical grade 2 hamstring injury. Does the staff in the National Football League, are you meeting on a weekly basis? Maybe it's one touch point a day, or is it, hey, here's where we're at from the AT standpoint. Here's where we're at from the strength and conditioning standpoint. How does that conglomerate into one message?
Here's what I would say is that the big part of it is that you need one chief. Okay. And in different teams, different people run the program. Like, I'm not having medical, I'm not opposed to the head athletic trainer being in charge of it. Being in performance, I'm not opposed to the head strength coach. Being involved in sports science, I'm not opposed to the sports science person. It just has to be the right person that knows how to communicate it, the message to the head coaches and the coaching staff. So with all these high performance models that now exist in our environment, our head trainer, Jeff Ferguson, he's the director of player health and performance, or vice president of player health and performance. In another setting, it might be the sports scientist. So it varies between the teams, but if there's no collaboration and it's sort of done rogue, I think that's where things get in trouble. And I think here we're very fortunate. We have good communication with the strength staff, the sports science, nutrition, behavioral health also has become a big part of it. And then ourselves in the training room as well. So it's all about seamless communication that's athlete centric. And if you do that and put the athlete first, everything else seems to work out okay.
Final pivot, but a comment before that. I don't know how you feel, Pete, on some of this stuff. Again, you have more experience than I, but I remember as a young coach just reading everything and anything about programming, periodization, rep schemes, set schemes, physiology, biomechanics, and all of it's important. But I've realized over the years that if you can't communicate well with people, that you're at a massive disadvantage. I've also realized that no one wants to spend an hour with a what. I'm not a good person.
That's right.
I've come to believe that like humility is massively important, and the ability. I don't know if it's the smartest person in the room. I don't know if it's the person who's got the biggest mouth. I think it's the person that reads the room the best and is able to communicate with people and make them feel part of something special.
100%, 100% correct. And that's why you got people, they're fighting for turf because they
Yes.
want to be the person in charge. But they might not be in this setting, they might not be the person in charge because we already picked the person that's the best person for the person in charge. In another setting, though, it might be completely different. So, because I met some strength coaches that are pretty smart guys that they've got common sense, they have good communication skills, and they understand the rehab process pretty well. So they know when to push. Like, I mean, Tommy Mazalinsky, Milo, Buddy Morris out at
Yeah.
Arizona. So, I mean, they're the guys that I came up under from, and Bill Ferran, who was with the Miami Heat for 30 years. These are the people that I came up under, listening to what they told me. So, like, I'd be 100% comfortable with them being in charge of a system.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, final pivot. I want to respect your time, Pete. Two questions, three actually. The pendulum, I say, where is the pendulum currently swinging regarding comprehensive athlete care? I don't know. And maybe compare that because you've had such a unique experience. You've been in, golf, professional hockey, and football. Are we focused on the right things right now? I know when I read a lot of social media, it seems like everything's based on technology and we've got to have some soft skills as well. That's my narrative. Is there a pendulum swinging too far in a certain direction, or do you feel it's where we need to be?
I'd say up at this level now, the hard part is that making sure that there's a trust factor with the athlete that you're dealing with. And the reason I say that is because a lot of guys, whether it be because of time constraints, collective bargaining agreement situations, they'll get care outside of here. So again, we see that all the time. And it's been in sport for as long as I've been in it. And I've been on both sides of the fence where I was one of those people that was always trying to keep the team informed. And I've also been the person where I'm on the team and I'm trying to collect information from these other people. So developing a relationship with your athletes support system, whether that's they might have a dry needler that they use that they believe in 100% and that does all their dry. I want to know what they did so that when they come in, if they feel a certain way, or that I could call them up and say, hey, their TFL is lit up about 2/3 of the way down, close to its attachment point. Can you take a look there tonight when you see them? So that's at this level, that's what I would say has existed. The general world of athletics, I think what happens is you had a period of time when I was young that there was a big emphasis on strength. and then it was bigger, faster, stronger. Then it shifted away from that and became function. Okay.
Sure.
If you remember Greg Cook, when he came
Oh
up
yeah.
with
Oh yeah.
with
Yeah.
the first set of tests that he did, not the SFMA, but the
Yep.
FMS.
Yep.
Again, what the screen did is it slowed everything down. So you could see stuff pretty easily when a person couldn't do it. And you knew, like going over the hurdle step, was it a weakness on the stance leg or was it a mobility problem on the leg that was moving? So everything shifted away from strength and got towards function. Now, to me, it seems like it's starting to work its way back, that you're saying, okay, we need strength and we need function. And identifying, like if we got three people, like for instance, if we've got three people and one person is strong, am I going to give them a heavy prowler to move? Probably not, because they're probably not powerful. I want them exploding out of that. I have other people that are powerful, but they're not strong. And then I got other people that are in the middle of the road. So identifying those individual needs is probably the most important thing if we really want to do the best thing for our athletes. But I would say the shift for me, and then in response to your question, the complete care was the first part of the answer. The second part is it's gone from bigger, faster, stronger to function. And now it's starting to figure out who needs what is going to be the most important thing.
Excellent advice to young practitioners. You've been in this your whole life. Rewind your career to day one. What would you advice would you take for yourself? Maybe there's nothing. What would if you were starting today?
But I think the thing about athletics and performance that, as you've seen, is that it doesn't happen overnight. And now young kids struggle with that because of the instant gratification with having the internet and having, you could get an answer in 30 seconds. We never were able to do that. We had to fight for our answers. We might have had to fly cross country to talk with somebody that made us think the right way, like a Tom House with pitching. I spent a day and a half with him 30 years ago.
Wow, that guy, he's bright.
So again, like you think about stuff like that. So if I was going to tell young kids anything, it would be patient and let it happen organically. Most people want it to happen too fast and they don't want to go through the steps, because when you skip steps, you get in trouble because you start going down and just thinking one thing. Learn as much as you can. Looked at MAT, I've looked at ART, I've looked at Graston, I've looked at dry needling, I've looked at AIM, I've taken as many different things as I possibly can, and I've just molded into something that works for me. But you're going to see that sometimes you need to activate stuff, sometimes you need to shut stuff down, sometimes you need to lengthen it, sometimes you need to shorten it. So if you're one dimensional, you're going to help some people, but you're not going to help everybody.
Outstanding answer. Last question. Legacy. Your career comes to an end. They all do. How do you want to be remembered? And by the way, I know your background. You're being really humble, and I'm going to have a great introduction at the start of the show. And I've had talked to Reg just about the kind of human being you are and the legacy you're going to leave behind. But how do you want to be remembered when it's all said and done, when you're retired?
I don't know. That's probably a question 4 or 5 years from now, because I would I would say this, that I'd like to be remembered as being grateful for all of the good people that have come into my life that have taught me things, such as the Reg Grants, the Bill Ferrans, the Tommy Bislinskis, from a performance standpoint, the Buddy Morrises, because that's what you want your legacy, I think, to be. It's to pass on those ideas that were really good ideas of some of those people, and then be able to take some of your own and maybe polish theirs a little bit, bring a little bit of your own there. But to me, I don't know I'm ready for that question, other than to say, just be grateful, because if you've been around good people, that's why you are where you are.
Our guest today has been Pete Draovitch. Pete, thanks so much for joining us, my friend.
Thank you, Anthony. Thanks for all your great work. Appreciate it.